How y'all doing? Doing good, great. We're going to go over the trumpets today, or at least the first four trumpets. We're going to get all the way through chapter 8 here today, the three woes, and how those relate, I believe, to the Olivet Discourse. Not going to talk too much about the Olivet Discourse, but a little bit, and the Apocalypse of 70 AD. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, do so. It'll help promote my videos, so that works out really good. And if you want to go to my website, you can at scarsforthomas.com, and I've got articles and all kinds of things on there you can look at. So we talked last week about Revelation not being chronological, and I'm not going to spend a little review here. One of the things I didn't talk about was this verse, and this is in Revelation 16:19, so we're jumping ahead here a little. But it says, the great city was divided into three parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God. So if this came in remembrance, then we're going back. We're doing a flashback. We're going back to something else that was already addressed or already talked about. So it's another instance of something being out of chronology or in a different chronological order. So you're remembering. So God's remembering something. That means he's going back. So it's just another little proof of the flashbacks, and we're going to talk more about it when we get into Revelation 16. So that was a flashback, and we're going to do some flashbacks today too. The two main topics of chapter 7 were first that the 144,000 represent all saints, past, present, and future, which I believe was a flashback, in order for those seals to be done prior to people getting hurt in chapter 6. Then we talked about the innumerable multitude that represent all those saints on the last day, or the resurrection of the day, which I believe is a flash forward. I also talked about this real quickly, about Jesus not being fully Jew, and I want to really explain a little bit more about it, not much, but Tamar is a little questionable. Some people see Tamar as a Jew, and some people say that she was a Canaanite. But either way, we know Rahab most certainly was a Canaanite harlot, and then Ruth was Moabite. So we know that those two were at least for sure not Jewish or Israeli. So Joseph's lineage is the one I'm looking at here in Matthew. But even though that's Joseph's, it's also Mary's, because Mary and Joseph had the exact same lineage all the way up to David, up to King David. You see that in this chart, that they're identical all the way up to David. Well, they don't show the early stuff in Matthew, but we know that all the stuff started from Abraham. You can see there's identical in both lineages. So you see that they had the same lineage, so therefore you know that those women that were noted there that were not Jewish in both those lineage. It also shows that what we were talking a little bit about last week was that that each of the lineages is basically that misogynistic, or from a male, mainly they'd give the males. That's a typical way to give, the genealogy is giving the man's genealogy. It's very unusual that they even put the women in there at all. That's not a normal practice. So it shows you something different that's going on here. They wanted to put those Gentiles in the lineage, because typically they wouldn't be in there, the women. And you don't even know, if you go through like somebody like Solomon, or some of those people had so many wives, and they had a lot of Gentile wives. So it'd get really crazy. So they would do their lineage only from the man point of view, which also shows that 144,000. When you start getting to say they're males and they're virgins, they're married to, not given to marriage and all that. It's all from a male point of view, but it means women too. And this is the same thing. It's like saying God created man in his own image. That's male and female, meaning both male. He says male. So last day, we went over that too last week. And this is when he opens that seventh seal. There's that silence in heaven for the space of a half an hour. So that half hour, I think he's talking about half of the hour, like the last hour. So it's just meaning a certain amount of time. not necessarily 30 minutes. And so we're looking at the last hour. This would be the half of that. Half of that time period would be this seventh seal of that last hour or the last day. And that's the way I see that. And then if you think about that, you go, well, why half? Well, that half of that, he's putting a big chunk of it, of this glory or magnificence of people falling at his feet as dead. So that there's other people have other interpretations of this. I'm going to go through one of them, that there's another interpretation of this, but I don't agree with it. And I think this is the last hour. And half of it is going to be in awe or showing the glory of God. And that's what I think, because of that glory, we've never seen God. When we see God, we're going to fall at his feet like dead. And we're going to be afraid. There's going to be fear. And that's going to be normal. And that goes for both the believers and the non-believers. They're all going to be afraid, very afraid. So that word, you can see there, it means half an hour. It's not like they used the word hour and then added half to it. It's another word. So this is one of the things that people will say, is that they believe that the seventh seal is like unleashing the trumpets. And they also believe that the seventh seal is controlled by it opens also the hour of incense, or the time of incense, because it's going to talk about the incense here in a minute. And they get this from Luke 10, and they say the whole multitude of the people were praying without at the hour of incense. But that doesn't say a half hour of incense. That says an hour of incense. So it's like the time. King James actually translates that time. So it's similar to the last hour, but it's just saying there's an amount of time it takes to do the hour of incense. It's the time to do the incense. And they would do it no matter how much time it took. If it took 5 minutes or it took 10 minutes, if it took an hour or it took 2 hours, it wouldn't matter. It's the time of incense. And it's not really meant to be a time. So, but people take this and they run with this, and they put this because the incense is coming right after that seventh seal, which the seventh seal has a period at the end of it. It's done. It's done. There's a period. It's not a continuation. This is not a continuation. And when you go to 8:2, chapter 8, verse 1 has a period at the end of that sentence. Now they put it at chapter 8. I think it should have been in chapter 7. Regardless, that's seeing that word there. Aura means hour or time or period. And like I said, this is what, like in Revelation 1:17, I think they're going to fall at his feet like dead. And I think that's what everybody's going to do. And that was looking at a symbol of Jesus. When you actually see God, it's going to be a lot more terrifying, and in a good way. So, like I said in the last one, the 7 days of creation, I believe, is also like the 7 seals of completion, or the 7 trumpets of completion, etc. But also in there, even though we see this as a good thing to the 7th seal, it's also decreation. And we're going to see that decreation theme through these trumpets. We've seen it in the seals too. Talked a little bit about it, not much, but in the seals, trumpets, angel voices, and bowls, there's always that decreation going on. So the things that we've seen in creation, we're actually seeing here almost like a decreation, where it's instead of the blessing, you're getting the curses. So especially in this first 4, it's a lot of curses, and actually through this whole thing until you get to the 7th. But this one is focusing on a certain aspect of it, like the other one did too, but like the seals did too. But the trumpets are doing a little bit more. It's a little bit stronger in some sense, in a way. What we went over last one was the 7th seal in that gap. Well, if you look at all the way across, you can see that that's all tied together. And you see that the silence for a half hour, kingdom, the world has become the kingdom of our Lord. Then the great supper, so the marriage supper, and then it is done. And those are all tied together. So you're seeing a silence, I see this almost as a beginning, and then it is done as at the end, the final thing said by God. So today we're going to go over the first 4 trumpets. You can see again the gap on the seals, and then you see a bigger gap between the 6th and 7th trumpet. We won't get into that until next time. So the other thing I want to just mention is how I see this a little bit is the staggered sequence. So basically what we're doing as we're going through, we got the first seal, then you got the first trumpet, then you got the first angel voice, and then you got the first bowl. Then you'll have the second seal, then the second trumpet, then the second angel voice, and then the second bowl, and then so on and so forth. So basically I think that these are going in, kind of a staggered chronology. Now they're not perfect, but I think that this is basically the idea that you basically get through all the first ones until you get any one of the second ones. Because you're looking at the same picture just again. You're just seeing it from a little different perspective. You're seeing the exact same events. You're just seeing them in a little bit different perspective. Or maybe a little staggered. So you're looking at the same thing, just a little bit different time-wise off from the other. I'm going to read through these. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the 3rd part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. And the second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a 3rd part of the sea became blood. And a 3rd part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a 3rd part of the ships were destroyed. And a 3rd angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the 3rd part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the 3rd part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. And the 4th angel sounded, and a 3rd part of the sun was smitten, and a 3rd part of the moon, and a 3rd part of the stars, so as the 3rd part of them was darkened. And the day shone not for a 3rd part of it, and the night likewise. And I beheld, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, 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 to all the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices and of the trumpet of the 3 angels, which are yet to sound. I want to talk about these first things, these incense and their prayers. Incense, if you've read Revelations, you know it means prayers. And if you read the Bible, actually it's all over the Bible, that incense is a representation of prayers. And I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given these 7 trumpets. First off, we're going to go through these first 4, but this is like a preparation time. Just like we've seen in the seals, there was a preparation time before the seals started. This is the preparation time, and you can see they're standing before, and they were given these trumpets. So somebody came and gave them the trumpets. Who? We don't know. Was it the Lamb? We don't know. It doesn't state. But somebody gave them the trumpets. Somehow they had this authority. And it's very similar to what we've seen in Revelation 5. So like we're looking at the same storyline again. In there, the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. So it's very similar because you got the 7 there. And then the Lamb came and took the book out of the right hand of him that sat on the throne. So you're doing a preparation time here. So just like that they were given the 7 trumpets, he went and took the book that had the 7 seals. So it's a little preparation time. So you're almost seeing the same things unfold that we've seen in getting ready to do the seals as you're getting ready to do the trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar having the golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. So now we're seeing these prayers of all the saints, these incense. Well, we see the exact same thing. This is the verse right after the one I just read earlier in chapter 5. And what's that about? The prayers of the saints. What in golden vials. So you're looking at this and these things just being repeated. It's the same preparation, just a little bit different. The difference is these guys have trumpets, where Jesus was taking the scroll that had the seals on it. But the trumpets are there, and then what do we see right after? Immediately after that preparation time, then we see the prayers of the saints. So I don't think that the incense has anything to do with the opening of the seventh seal. I think we're just looking at a repeat of the story going back into chapter 5. Just look like what we've seen in chapter 5. They prepare. The angels prepare to blast the trumpets. Jesus prepared. He got the scroll. Then you see the prayers of the saints. They're offered in a little different way. It's like telling the story in a little bit different way, but it's the same story, essentially. It's just being repeated. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. So once again, you see this coming, those prayers going up to God. God loves those prayers. We can't pray enough. God loves it. So you can't lose by praying because it's going up to God. That's that sweet smell. To him, our prayers means a lot to God. There's in Psalms 141, it says, "Let my prayer be set forth before thee as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as an evening sacrifice." Once again, this is that sacrificial killing that we're going to see through here. In the seals, trumpets, we're now in the trumpets, but all these killings has a sacrificial element to it. And I'll try to point that out as we get going through it. "And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it unto the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake." That earthquake, once again, I believe is like the shaking of the covenants. But the casting those prayers, we've seen the prayers, and even in the last one, we've seen the people screaming for vengeance in chapter 6, verse 9, that they want vengeance. When are we going to get vengeance? Well, this is the vengeance being taken out here too, because he's taken those prayers, which is our prayers, our prayers, and they're being cast to the earth to destroy the people that are hurting God's people. So this is what we're seeing here. So those prayers actually have power in them because God releases it back on the people. A lot of people talk on this a lot about the imprecatory type prayers where you're praying for something that, if somebody's doing something bad to God, it's okay to pray vengeance to him. Just like we've seen in chapter 6, verse 9. It's that they're waiting for vengeance. They're wanting vengeance. So when we pray, that's okay to pray that way. Now, we're not supposed to hate the person, but we can hate the person and what they're doing, if it's against God. So that's a different way. And even you'll see David prayed that way a lot in a lot of his Psalms and stuff. That he was wishing these things bad on people that did things bad to God. And that's in his mindset. So those would be okay too. So here's Revelation 6:9. "They cried with a loud voice, saying, 'Avenge our blood.'" They want vengeance. So that's, in a sense, the prayers there. I see this as the prayers of the saints. It's almost the same idea. I think this is all figurative, but it's the prayers of the saints. And then now they're coming down, being cast down to earth. That vengeance. So in this chapter, in chapter 8, there's a lot of these thirds. Third part, third part, third part. So we see that over and over. And I think that gives us a clue that this is a beginning of the bad. We're still at the very beginning, just like the first one kind of initiated, the seals initiated everything, and then this is just showing it a little farther in the progression. We went a little bit farther into the storyline. You can see that here in this chart. Especially you see there, I have chapters 8 and 9. You see a third of the trees were destroyed, the third of the sea turned to blood, a third of the waters, a third, I say heaven, but it's really like the moon and the stars and the sun. Then you see the next one is the people who aren't sealed, and we'll get into those. And then you see a third of the men. So it's a third pretty much in this in the trumpets. Pretty much all the way through the trumpets, it's a third. And so it's telling us something here, that we're at the beginning, and we're only gotten so far into the progression, in this, a third of the way through is the way they think of it. And that's the way I see it. I see actually 6 and actually even 7 accounts where you're going through this 7 times in the book of Revelation. I've only showed 4 so far. Now I'm showing you a few more, so you're getting 6. So you can see 6 of my different scenarios here. And so if you really, the 7th is really just showing the last day, so I don't really count it as a whole account, even though it is an account, or it is a repeat. But you can see the seals and trumpets. By the time you get to the end of the trumpets, you'd be a third of the way done. And these are just fun facts. The other thing is we have 22 chapters. So if you divide 22 by 3, or by a third, it'd be 7.33. So that means a third of the way through the 8th chapter, which is the chapter we're on, you'd be a third of the way through. Does that mean anything? No, it doesn't mean nothing. None of this does. I don't think this is, the main point of this is to show that you're about a third of the way of these vengeance being taken out. And that we're not going to get to the full amount of vengeance, that I believe it's only a third of the way through. But these little facts don't mean nothing. So Ezekiel is another, I think, allusion to this, where he takes and he's doing an acted out parable, and he cuts his hair, and then he divides it into thirds, and he burns a third of it with fire, and then he hits it with his knife, a third of it, and then another third he scatters in the wind. But this is more categories, but that's all coming on the house of Israel. So he sees it in 3 phases. It's a little different, but because there are categories, different things happening to him, but it's a little bit of an allusion to it. The main allusions that we see in this chapter is mainly Egypt is the first one, I think, the main one. And Egypt, you see the hail and fire, which we see in this one. The sea turning to blood, that's one of the plagues. And then also we're going to get into the bitter, which is also when they were in the 40 years in the desert. And that was one of the allusions to that too. In Sodom, same thing, the brimstone and fire raining out of heaven from God, judging them. And then lastly, the Jericho. So Jericho, the 7 trumpets. What happened at the 7th trumpet? That's when it was all completed. Everything was completed at the 7th trumpet. It was all done. He didn't have to do any more. God finished what he was doing there. Egypt and Sodom. Egypt was the worst country as far as the Israelites go. If you really think about it, they were in bondage for a long time before they got out. Then Sodom could actually be thought of as like one of the worst cities, if not the worst. It was the worst corrupt city. And that's why God destroyed it the way he did. Because God never did that, like anything like that, to any other city. Jericho is another bad city, but those 2 were really the 2 top worst country and cities in the Bible. And you see this in chapter 11, verse 8. And it says this little part here, it says, "And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of that great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified." So we're looking at what? Who is this? Who is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt? It's Jerusalem. Where was Jesus crucified? Jerusalem. That's the city. That's the city. It's spiritually called Sodom and Egypt. Those are the worst. Those are the worst 2 cities, or city and country. And he's calling Jerusalem, spiritually, them. They're the same. Well, what was the other one we had? Babylon. What's the other city talked about in this? Babylon, over and over. Babylon, Babylon, Babylon. Well, Babylon fits right in with Sodom and Egypt. And with this clue here, it really it jumps out at me, just like we see in all these allusions in here. We're looking at Egypt, we're looking at Sodom, we're looking at Jericho, and we're looking at Babylon. And they all relate spiritually to Jerusalem. All of them. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one that kills the prophets. So these are the first 4 trumpets. I believe that the first 4, kind of that time at the very beginning of the destruction. So it's kind of two, when they really start to get it, they don't fully destroy the city yet, but they're getting there and doing the beginning phases of it all. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. So once again, it's that preparation time, the beginning, similar to like the seals and all those, right at the beginning. So we're looking at that first trumpet, which is hail and fire with blood. And all those, if you go across, you're going to see some of those things. Those are all the beginning things of Christ controlling. The Lamb's in control. He's the one that's set forth to conquer. He's conquering. He's the one that hail and fire with blood. That's coming from that censer, in a sense, that censer from the angels, throwing it down on the earth, coming from where? The throne, from God. This is all coming from God. That's a thing that a lot of people, because they take this like that God's going to just kill everybody. But no, we went through all this stuff in chapter 7. All these people who are sealed are not going to get hurt. And it's very clear that the people who are sealed are not being hurt by God. So when something comes down from heaven, it's not coming to hurt us or the saved. It's the people who are apostate, which is Jerusalem, which he's talking about here. The other thing you see from God, the everlasting gospel from Christ. All this is from Christ. And then you see also the grievous sore for them with the 666. So they have the wrong seal. They have the 666 seal. So I just showed this real quickly because this first is, you have to get this right. Who is this coming from and who is it going to? It's going to the people who don't have the seal of the Father on them. That's the ones who are being punished here. And God's very selective. Just like we're going to see in all of these different allusions, God protects his people. And the other ones are the ones getting the judgment here. It's just not arbitrary, reckless abandon, God throwing fire and hail and fire down at earth. No. It's very planned out. God has it exactly who he needs it to go to. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood. And they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So that mingled with blood is a very key to this, because it's like the sacrifice. You're mingling it with blood because the blood is coming down like a sacrifice. These are sacrificial killings. They're killing these people because of what they did, apostate, what they did to Jesus, murdering him on the cross. And that's who this is aimed at. This is aimed at apostate Jerusalem. And all these, you're going to see all these things, how they fit together. But so this is heaven sending down this hail. This was actually, you can see this as an allusion to the 7th plague on Egypt. And everybody sees this. I mean, it's very common. Hail and fire mingled together. Well, Egypt, like we talked about, who is spiritually Egypt? Jerusalem. We just read it. Jerusalem is spiritually Egypt. So whenever we see an allusion to Egypt, we know we're spiritually seeing Jerusalem. And these are hail and fire. I mean, you can't even fit it more better than that. So all came on. The other thing, it came only on the land of Egypt. Remember that none of it went into Goshen. The Israelites didn't get any hail and fire. There was none in their camps or their areas where they lived. Only in the Egyptians. So this is very selected by God. He knows who his people are, who have the seal. Who have the seal? Who has a 666? There's 2 camps. One gets it, the other one doesn't. And Egypt is spiritually Jerusalem. Josephus talks about some of this, all these trees and everything being burned up. He says, and now the Romans, although they were greatly distressed in getting together their materials, raised up their banks in 21 days. After that, they had cut down all the trees that were in the country adjoining to the city, and that for 90 furlongs round about, as I have already related. And truly, the very view itself of the country was as a melancholy thing. For those places which were before adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become a desolate country every way, and its trees were all cut down, nor could any foreigner that had formerly seen Judea and the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as a desert. Now that's the thing I want to stop there, a desert. Because remember I said the desolation, abomination of desolation, it's like making it desert-like. It's useless. It's ruined. And that's exactly what happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD. They made it look like a desert. It was once the promised land. They cut down all the trees. They burned up all the grass. They destroyed it. Everything. Not one stone was left on another, as Jesus said. They completely wiped it out. They even burnt down all the stones, the rocks, the bricks. They burned everything down to get the gold out of it and everything. It's all recorded. I mean, they destroyed it. They made it once a paradise, now became desert, desolation. That's what abomination of desolation is. Abomination, it made it desolate. And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. So you imagine this huge mountain on fire, and it was cast into the sea, and then the sea became blood. Well, a third part of the sea became blood. When you look across at these, on this second trumpet, you see this second seal is those wars. And we looked at that and we knew that represented blood. And we have the second trumpet, so we're getting a third of the sea turn into blood. And then we can look into Babylon has fallen, and they're going to drink the wrath of the wine of their fornication. Remember, she was drunken with the blood of the saints. And see, that's the same thing, Babylon. She was drunken with the blood of the saints. Who? Babylon, Egypt, Sodom, spiritually, Jerusalem. And then look at the last on the vial, the sea fully to blood. So we're going in graduations. It gets more and more as we go. Stronger and stronger through that second, all those stab, seal, trumpet, angel voice, and vials and bowls. So this is Josephus again, and for such as were drowning in the sea, if they lift up their heads up above the water, and the Romans cut off either their heads or their hands. So, but at the end of it says, one might see the lake all bloody. So after they see all these dead bodies and everything, the whole Sea of Galilee, this is talking about the Sea of Galilee, it looked all bloody. So it's kind of a literal fulfillment. Even though I don't see these as literal fulfillment, I see these more figurative in the sea turning to blood and all that. This is all figurative. I think this is just basically showing the things that he's doing an allusion to Sodom and Egypt. And Egypt being one of them, where the sea turned to blood. So they're saying that God is pouring out his wrath upon Babylon, Jerusalem. We've read this before. This is when Jesus come up to the fig tree. This is an acted out parable. And he goes sees the first fig tree has leaves on it, so he comes up to it to get some figs, and it had no figs. So he said, "Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever." So he's cursing this fig tree. With a fig tree, we know from prior that it represented Jerusalem. And this is really interesting. We've already went through this, but it's really interesting because immediately after this, look what he says. And the disciples saw it, and they marveled, saying, "How soon the fig tree withered away?" And Jesus answered and said unto them, "Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, shall be done." Mountain he's sitting there looking at is Mount Zion, the Temple Mount. He's looking at the Temple Mount. He says, if you say to this mountain, "Be thou removed and cast into the sea," just like that burning mountain we're looking at here in Revelation chapter 8. If you say, take that mountain and throw it into the sea, it'll be done. Jesus is putting another little bit of a prophecy in here in a very unique way. A lot of people see this as like a word of faith. Like you say, "Oh, take that mountain and throw it into the sea, it could be done." In other words, you could do anything. But that isn't really what this is about, any more than the fig tree, that you can go up and curse fig trees. You can't curse fig trees, and you can't make mountains go into the sea. But Jesus can make prophecy about these things. And the prophecy, what does it mean? What is the figures here? What is Jesus talking about? Jesus didn't really want them to carve him up and eat his flesh and drink his blood either. What Jesus is talking about is the Mount Zion is going into the sea. The sea represents the Gentile world. So you got the Mount Zion, which once was Israel's, is now going into the sea. You have the fig tree, which was once the way God worked through Israel, is withered and dried and no more. And the green tree is gone. And Jesus is the new green tree. You see this in Jeremiah. At the end of his ministry, he says, he's talking about Babylon. He says, "O destroying mountain." This is the way they talked about mountains being like a country or a kingdom. So, "O destroying mountain," he's talking about Babylon and that they would be destroyed. "I will make thee a burnt mountain." This is God. "Thus saith the Lord." This is from Jeremiah saying it, "Thus saith the Lord." And look at it, I like what it says at the end. "And they shall not take of thee a stone for a corner, nor a stone for foundations, but thou shalt be desolate forever, saith the Lord." Sounds very similar to not one stone to be left on another there. "And a third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed." We're seeing these thirds again, so we have all these creatures dying in the sea, and then the ships being destroyed. Well, you can see also in Josephus, this is just a continuation of the same thing I was just reading about Sea of Galilee. He's talking being full of shipwrecks. It says how the smell was so bad that even the Romans couldn't take the smell. They didn't even take it. It was so bad. "And the third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp. And it fell upon the third part of the rivers and upon the fountains of waters." So you can imagine this. Everybody imagine this star, this huge star falling from heaven onto the earth. And we know this can't be literal. If one star falls on the earth is obliterated. So we know this is figurative. I mean, I think even the dispensationalists would probably say this is figurative, but they may or may not. So we see if we go across this third, the black horse represents famine. So here we have the waters bitter. So a third of the water bitter. Then we're going to also talk about if any man has a 666, he's going to drink the wrath. So it's drinking. It's not really drinking, but it's of that idea of the water. And then you got the fountains turning to blood. So they still kind of somewhat figuratively fit together in a really odd way. But you can see how it progresses. Once again, you have a third of the water's bitter. Then you're going to have fountains completely into blood by the time you get to the third vial. And the name of the star is called wormwood, and a third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were made bitter. So wormwood means bitter or bitterness, and we get that from Mara. When the children of Israel were in the desert for the 40 years, they come to Mara. And Mara, they couldn't drink the water. So the water, why? Because it was bitter. Which means it probably wasn't, you couldn't drink it even if you were really thirsty. I mean, really badly thirsty, you couldn't drink it. So God gave Moses a tree to throw into the water, and then it made the water sweet, or being able to drink. So here we're seeing an opposite of that. We're seeing the opposite effect here now in Revelation. Instead of a blessing from something falling into the water, we're getting a curse. So what's coming into the water now is a curse. So the bitterness is being put into the sweet water. You have sweet water, and it's made bitter. We're here in once again, this is from Egypt, from the Exodus from Egypt. We're looking at it again, the opposite effect. And actually, the word wormwood is a plant. It's like a tree. So this star that's falling from heaven is like a tree. And so you see that opposite effect. So the bitter plant known as wormwood, this is just the definition of it. So you're seeing this, essentially a plant, wormwood's a plant, falling like a star. So the star is like their covenant falling. Their bad covenant, Jerusalem, probably more like the city, Jerusalem, falling from heaven, and it's now making all the waters bitter. So as that city falls, all the waters become bitter. And just the opposite of what throwing that, so it's a plant. It's essentially a plant, because that's what wormwood is. It's a plant, and it's a poisonous plant. Well, it's been associated with poison. So their covenant is dried up, dead. They're falling. So their covenant or their city, Jerusalem, Babylon is falling. They're falling from heaven and making all the waters bitter. You can see this too in Deuteronomy. It says gall and wormwood. So both basically poisonous. And Proverbs talks about bitter as wormwood. So we know it's bitter. And it's many things that talk about it. Here's in Jeremiah, and he says, the prophets of Jerusalem, they're going to be unto me as Sodom and as Gomorrah. So once again, we have Sodom in there. So the prophets of Jerusalem are like Sodom. So just as like what we were looking at in chapter 11, we're seeing it here back in Jeremiah. The same type of prophecy, the same type of thing. And I will feed them with wormwood and make them drink the water of gall. Prophets of Jerusalem is profaneness. So those prophets at that time, that all were saying all the good things, how everything good was going to happen, and Jeremiah was the only one saying that the bad things were going to happen, you know. This is basically, you see that Sodom being associated with Jerusalem. And the fourth angel sounded, and a third part of the sun was smitten, and a third part of the moon, and a third part of the stars, and a third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for the third part of it, and the night likewise. So the sun smitten, this basically means like striking it. It was like a strike. Smitten means like a striking it or hitting it. But I think for the most part too, this means that a third part of it was destroyed. But it can't be, because we know that if the third part of the sun is destroyed, then we all die. But I mean, quite honestly, God can do anything he wants to do. I mean, if God wants to take away the third part of the sun, he could do it and people could still live. He could make it so people live. But more than likely, this isn't meant to convey that. This is more likely meant to convey that this is catastrophic things happening. And these are actually things that have to do with covenants and the people and God's wrath. And that's all those things tied in here again to the same ideas. And we can see this when we go back and look at the Old Testament. It shows us these things. Very similar wording, and it's repeated over and over. So when we see these things, we know that it's kingdoms being destroyed and things like that. It doesn't mean literally what it's saying. The four seals, death and hell, the third of the sun, and then Jesus is going to reap, and then the sun to scorch. So you can see that sun theme is in there, but these are catastrophic things too. Death and hell, hell following him. These are catastrophic. The progression gets worse and worse as we go. It just keeps getting worse until we get to the six seals, trumpet, angel voice, and vial. This is the ninth plague on Egypt. What happened? The same thing. It was dark in Egypt, but in Goshen, it's light. The same thing is the darkness. So it's similar to the third part of the sun, but this would be, say, like a half and half, I guess. But this is a supernatural thing that God did. You can't even imagine that or how that would work. But how does the light shine in one place and not the other? It's very supernatural. So God can do anything he wants to do. I'm going to say that. If God wants to take out a third of the sun, he could do it, and we could still live. He could make the darkness over the land of Egypt. He could do that. But the idea here was he's trying to send a message. And we're going through this always as sending a message. And the message is to the evil people, not to his believers. He's protecting them. And the same like he did then. This is Babylon, says the same, similar type of thing. This is about Babylon being destroyed. And it says, for the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light, and the sun shall be darkened in its going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. It's a very similar language that we see in there. And this is about military power, people coming in and taking them out militarily, which is exactly what happened to Jerusalem in 70 AD. This is the same thing that God says to the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, I will also water with thy blood the land wherein thou hast swimmeth, even to the mountains, and the rivers shall be full of thee. And when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven, and make the stars thereof dark, and I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. So this is, once again, military power. It's catastrophic things, but it's all figurative, because we know none of those things happened to Egypt at that time, but that's Ezekiel making that prophecy about it. Peter on the day of Pentecost, once again, repeating what Joel said, the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon into blood before that great and notable day of the Lord. All those allusions go back to that. And what he said, this is that. And he's talking about people speaking in tongues. So it's a huge thing, but it's not literally what he's saying there. It's talking about huge things happening in the heavens that we don't see. We don't see those things, but it's heavenly things that are happening. When the day of Pentecost was a heavenly thing, it was a glorious thing, but people just see someone speaking in tongues. They don't see the moon turn into darkness or any of that stuff, the moon into blood or the sun turning to darkness. But that's what is going on in the heavens, in the spiritual realm. This is from the Olivet Discourse. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. We know that all ties, in context, it ties to not one stone will be left upon another. It's saying the same things over and over. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, 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 to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels, which are yet to sound. In some versions of this, it says eagle instead of angel flying in heaven. I'm going to give you my opinion, right? This is my opinion. I think it's angel. I don't think it's eagle. But I'm going to show you all these cool things about the eagle, if it was eagle, but I don't think it's eagle. And I'll tell you why, because there's never any animal in the book of Revelation that ever speaks. And there's a lot of animals, but they're like weird heavenly animals that speak. They're not just a regular animal speaking. We do have a lamb, but he never speaks. And a lot of people don't realize that until you get down to it, but he doesn't ever speak. So is that a good reason? That's not a good reason. It could be eagle. I hope it is eagle, because I like eagle better. But because it's different. But I don't see that in there, so that's my opinion on that. But it could be. I mean, it'd be odd that got changed somewhere through the years, But and we see angels so much going on in the heaven, through the midst of the heaven, that typically it's not eagle. So I mean, it's just be odd if it was there. But it has all this neat stuff about eagle. This is in Deuteronomy. If thou wilt not hearken, all these curses shall come upon thee. Thy carcass shall be meat unto the fowls of the air. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Once again, in the Olivet Discourse, we've seen wherever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. So that eagle reference, again, fits really good to a lot of these verses. So I think it's neat the way it does that. And then also we see the eagle is the Roman symbol. So it would be another indicator if that is eagle. But that's, like I said, it's in the ASV version. I hope it is that, but I just have a feeling it's not. So the woes, these three woes, woe is opposite of a blessing. So we're looking at basically curses, right? So it's opposite. It's a direct opposite of a blessing, would be a woe. So we have these three woes, the fifth stab and the sixth stab and the seventh stab. And see, I put some little references, and the first is those souls. Remember in the first woe, the souls, they're wanting what? Vengeance. They're asking for vengeance. That's what they want. They're screaming for it, like Judas Priest, screaming for vengeance. Then the pits opened. So the pits opened is what? It's demonic. So it's another part of that woe. When God releases the pit, that's demonic spirits coming out of it. And then the sickle is the one before. Like I said, there's always the step before, but it's the sickle is given what he's going to use, the instrument to destroy them with. And then the beast kingdom, once again, full of darkness. See, just like it's that allusion to Egypt again. The beast kingdom has darkness. The saints' kingdom has light. The second woe, which I believe is the destruction of Jerusalem, that's the day of wrath, the wrath of the Lamb. The men slain by fire would be the trumpets. The power over fire would be the angel voice. And then all the water dried up. So you're seeing this same kind of scenario through there, where it's kind of given the same things. And these woes, these are all woes, really bad things. And then the third woe, silence. You'd say, well, silence, what's so bad about silence? But if you're standing before God and you're not right with God, that's a big woe. That's a big woe. And judgment, wrath, that's in the trumpets. We'll get to that. The lake of fire and the angel voices. And then you see also in the last one, it is done. And so really these woes, I think, are a graduation. In other words, the first woe, it's bad. It's not that bad. Second woe, it's bad. It's really bad. But the third woe is far beyond the other two woes. Because we're looking at, like, if I really was to draw this right, it'd be almost like a straight little skinny line, and then the third woe would go completely off the page. Because we're talking about the lake of fire. We're talking about eternity in the third woe. We're talking about the worst woe you could possibly have. That's the people going into the lake of fire. And these are the woes that Jesus said, woe unto thee, Chorazin, woe unto thee, Bethsaida. It shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon at the day of judgment than for you. Capernaum, I say unto you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for thee. He's used that word Sodom again. And he's talking about all these cities. These cities were all destroyed in 70 AD. All these people were destroyed in these cities. The day of judgment is what? That's the third woe. That's the worst thing that can happen to someone. That third woe. The day of judgment, that's when the third woe happens, at the day of judgment. And we're going to see that when we get to that on the 7th. That's the third woe. The second woe is the destruction of Jerusalem. See, here's some more woes of Jesus. It's just continuing on there in Matthew. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers. How can ye escape the damnation of hell? Once again, that hell, we know that death and hell are thrown where? Into the lake of fire. This is all about that third woe, the big one. This is Revelation 21:8. It's the very end, right? But the fearful, the unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, and idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. This is the third woe. It's the worst woe. It don't get any worse than this. And that's the thing that we don't see anymore of preachers preaching the three woes and preaching that hellfire and damnation. Everybody's so weak now, in my opinion, on that. But these three woes are similar to like the holy, holy, holy. This is the woe, woe, woe. So the third woe, you can't get any worse in it. Just like the holy, 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 you can't get any holier than that. When they're calling God holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, this is the same thing. You can't get any worse than the third woe. And that's what people are going to have to wake up someday and realize that they can't keep doing things like what he has listed here, which we have all these things in our world today. Every single one of them fearful. Wow. What are I going to say, 2021 and 2020? Man, you ever seen people more fearful than I'm sure there were times in the past too, but we just did. Next week, we're going to do the 5th and 6th trumpets, and we're going to actually go through those woes, which we really didn't get to today, and how those relate to the bottomless pit and the demons. And that's all I got for today.